Mexican values. They are tradition and tomorrow. And this is a Mexican flag, which a lot of people have already seen. Um, so for traditions, this is one of the biggest cultural values in Mexico. Uh, Mexicans are very proud and they're heavily reliant on their history. They all have a very traditional family structure and defined gender roles, religious rituals, obligations, and celebrations. So we see this love for tradition in both everyday life and celebrational gatherings. And especially so in like regular everyday roles where like a lot of Mexican families like to have the women at home and men often go out and work. Um, and so even there's like unspoken social agreements uh, in everyday life. So I know, for example, in my family, when we get together, um, the women for like parties, the women stay inside and they always make sure the men are fed and the men are outside. And that's just kind of how it always is. Nobody really questions it. Um, and so the women also never eat until the men are fed. And that's just kind of something that always happens. So my question for you guys is, how do you think this might be perceived as negative? So if you guys could kind of discuss this in class and kind of come up with a different ways that people might see this as a negative value, because we want to make sure that you guys understand the different perceptions of these cultural values. And kind of type in the chat when you're done discussing. All right, so depending on what you guys discussed, so one way that I kind of came up with that this might be perceived as a negative is Mexicans can be very resistant to change. And so one of the consequences of this is that people can be hesitant to speak up when they believe or think in different things. And this is now changing with young people, but because tradition is so deeply rooted in our history, it's going to take a lot longer for change to happen. Um, and so the next Oh, and so these are some of my pictures from when I was in Mexico, and you can kind of see one of the examples that I give. In the top left corner, that's my little sister and my cousin in church. And so one of the things that when I went over there in Mexico that I never realized was that little girls can't wear uh, nail polish or like any sort of like small lipstick in church until they have done their first communion. And so that day my little sister had nail polish on, and my little cousin had told her, why are you wearing nail polish? That's not allowed. And so that's kind of like one of the old school values. And then on the bottom left, that's me with all my cousins. And that's kind of like our traditions that we have in Mexico. We have like a rodeo every December. And then in the middle, that's kind of all my friends again. And you see the traditional clothing that we're wearing, and that's very typical around the holidays. And so top right is my 5 generations of women in my family. And then the bottom right is also the rodeo that we have every December, and it's kind of been around forever. And we don't really know like the origin of it, but we kind of just do it because it's tradition. And then the second cultural value is tomorrow, which is mañana in Spanish. And so for tomorrow. This is like another lifestyle kind of difference. So time in Mexico is a lot different than it is here in the US. When you think of time here in the US, you kind of say like it's very structured. If you're going to be here at this time, then you should probably be there like 5 minutes earlier. And so in Mexico, we value our time a little different. And it's not to say it's, better or worse. It's just people value each other's time differently. So in Mexico, there's a lot more flexibility. So if you say you're going to be somewhere at like 9, that's kind of just like a given parameter, and people are a lot more flexible. They're more understanding of, if you arrive a few minutes late, it's fine, stuff comes up. But we aren't as strict with time as we are here in the US. And so I want you guys to think about the same question again. How do you think this could be perceived as a negative in any other culture? Discuss that with your classmates and let us know when you're done. All right. So one of the ways this might be perceived as a negative is that you can be seen as unreliable, or like you don't care enough about other people's time. But it's not that. It's just people value their time differently. And so like one example of this is here in the US, for like birthday parties or events, you kind of have to RSVP, and the invitations usually say like the event is from 5 to 7, and you arrive at 5 and you leave at 7. In Mexico, nobody does that. And even here in the US, the Mexicans that I know, we never do that. Uh, I guess the event usually starts when the first person gets there and it ends until the last person leaves. Um, and so, it's a way it can be seen as negative, is not being unreliable or unappreciative of people's time, but it's not. It's just different from what we're used to. And so the bottom left is is a picture of my hometown, and so it looks really, really early, and that's usually when people are waking up and going to work, and then some people don't wake up until way later. And then the second picture on the right is a picture of my parents' wedding, well, their 25th anniversary wedding. And that was a funny day because nobody arrived on time, and it was perfectly fine with the church. I think we were like an hour late, and the pastor just started an hour late. So, in any other situation, that would have been very upsetting.